What's up, everybody? Alex here. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the second installment of Five Favorites, a monthly series of mine where I take some time to meet and have a conversation with a close friend, a fellow YouTuber, a family member, whatever it is. And the concept is easy, as I say. We simply pick five records, five of our favorite records that somehow fall into some kind of theme or a topic. And I'm really excited to preview and introduce the second episode featuring my good friend Sam St. John. Now, Sam St. John, he's been a member of the vinyl community since 2020 or so, but didn't really start collecting as many records until the year after. You might know him from his channel. You might know him because he's a singer, songwriter, guitarist, all of the things. His content is amazing across his channel, both in what he shows, his education of all the groups he's into, all the songs he's constantly writing or performing, all of these things that he is. But most importantly, over the past several months, he has become one of my best friends and closest confidants. So I know when I was putting this series together that I wanted him near the top of the list of people that I wanted to have this conversation with, the five favorites. So in the spirit of Sam St. John, be the type of music that he's into and the type of person he is, we wanted to focus this episode on some of our favorite singer-songwriters or some of our favorite players who have really emotionally impacted us and who we've become. And so Sam will talk a little bit about some of his favorite guitar players and songwriters. I'm talking about some of my favorite singer-songwriters of all time. And yeah, just absolutely loved the conversation with Sam. Like I said, he's become one of my closest pals. And yeah, hope you enjoy the conversation as we enter episode 2 of Five Favorites, and this one with Sam St. John.
With you, in terms of when I asked you about five favorites, what sort of came to mind for you and how you sort of wanted to, idealize this or think about this?
Okay, so that's the question. Like, you've opened the floor.
Well, I guess I'll have to edit that part out now too.
I thought you were gonna say, okay, well, all right, so we'll start with that. All right,
sir, we've been live for 3 minutes now. Oh, this is live. Shoot.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, go ahead. You got the floor.
No, that this is all good material. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Beer and Vine, for allowing me into your humble nook.
Beer and Vine.
Yeah, it's a shortened way of saying everything that doesn't need to be said.
Yeah.
Cheers to that. I mean, obviously, people that know my channel know I'm a strong lyric guy. Like, I love lyrics and songs. I love that style of. I mean, I do love my bubblegum kind of music. I mean, I do love my boy bands. But no, I mean, I was kind of thinking when you asked me that question, a few days ago, I was first thinking about like albums that kind of like pushed my guitar playing or my songwriting. And then I was kind of thinking, I was like, well, I've shown so many of those records so many times. I mean, like I could always show, like Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan or Closing Time, by Tom Waits. I've shown those albums. I Am Loving You by the Avett Brothers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a little bit of overlap for like an artist, but some of these albums, like I haven't shown that much. And they're still very like important records because like they kind of encapsulate a certain artist to me that I've latched onto. Some of these later in life, and then some, date back, to my earliest days getting into music. So that's kind of the direction I'm going. I mean, they're all songwriters, but they also all have their own little special reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned those 3 records, right? You mentioned Blood on the Tracks and Closing Time, and one of the Avett Brothers. I forget which one you said because I wasn't listening that much, but I grabbed all 3 of those. So I'll just put those back and grab something else. I didn't. I might have grabbed one though. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. But when I was kind of pulling some of my records too, of like, I don't know if you feel this way because we sort of went into this with this theme of songwriters / people who influence you on guitar, and definitely like the type of music that you play and that you write. But I always feel like this is where we get down to like the quote unquote the best versus the favorites, right? Like I hate the term best because there are so many people that just impact us on an emotional level very, very, very differently than other people, regardless of how great either of them are. And I'll talk about some of them when I get to my picks as well. But I feel like that might have been a little bit of indirectly what you were alluding to of like, these are maybe some people I haven't talked about as much, but they've had just as strong influence, because that tells me they might not be the biggest artists in the world, right? Like if you're not choosing Bob, of course Bob Dylan's amazing, he's the best, but it's like there's these other artists that have impacted us emotionally, that have just as big of a role on who we are, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that kind of goes into like the whole like things like, when people rank albums or whatever, which I'm guilty of, but the best album, I mean, like the best Bob Dylan album, very well might be, to use them as an example, might be Blonde on Blonde or, Highway 61 or whatever. But like for me, those don't hit me at the same level as a Blood on the Tracks or as like even like an Infidels does. So it comes down to, right. What revolving it around your life. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, before you jump into your first pick, we'll alternate, right? You do one, I'll do one.
Sure.
And then you'll show a record, I'll show a record. You know how it goes.
Oh, yeah.
But you're on the Beer and Vine channel, the Beer and Vinyl channel. What are you drinking tonight, Sam?
Well, we thought, we bring the summer a little bit early. I'd go with a good old, outdoor grilling kind of beer, hanging out with the boys, a fine local establishment, a fine Pilsner beer, as it were.
Pilsner beer. Ah, yes. I've heard of it.
So it's little known up in the Midwest, but around here it gains a lot of traction.
I'd say, that's like the single 1-bedroom apartment special right there.
Prost.
Well, also because I think Miller, are they from Milwaukee? I feel like they're from Milwaukee.
Yeah. Milwaukee, Mill Crawley, Mill City. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good joke. Also, Rainer from Milwaukee, a nice local brew that I've become known to be almost an unofficial ambassador for. We're going with some Pabst Blue Ribbon. I do remember somebody recently, one of our good friends, great channel, but he's from England, and he's like, he commented on one of my videos. He said, "One question: what's a PBR?" And there's part of me that's like, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. It's like one of those things.
It's a Blue Ribbon beer. Yeah,
it is a blue. Yeah, absolutely, it is. So, as you said, cheers, my man. I'll go ahead, toss it to you. Go ahead, show us that first pick, and let's get this thing on.
Yeah, and then we'll start the video. So I'm gonna start out of the 5. I'm gonna go with the artist that I've been around the longest, just because it just gets that out of the way, gets that pressure off. But I specifically chose this album, and I think the reason I chose this album is because it truly showcases his songwriting. Even though there are some covers on here, which he wasn't really known for putting covers on his recorded output. I mean, he did them in concert all the time. But I'm going to go with Petty first. Tom Petty. This is the Angel Dream record that came out. And sorry for the lighting. But it's essentially the She's the One soundtrack with a couple of songs removed. Like there were a couple of duplicates like Walls and Angel Dream. They just put this one version each. They added a couple of newer tracks. And again, for those that don't know, these were essentially mostly Wallflowers, which was the previous record, Wallflowers leftovers. And a lot of them ended up on the box set that came out a couple of years ago. But the reason I picked this is because there were songs on here like Zero from Outer Space, which I think is just like one of his like most underappreciated rockers. I mean, it's just a gritty kind of not grungy, but it's a very gritty tune. Mike Campbell shines on the guitars, but again, I also mentioned Angel Dream and Walls, which are two of his best songs that he ever wrote lyrically. Yeah, I mean, it's just he does another song called Supernatural Radio, which is really cool. But this is the Records for Day reissue that came out. I really, really like it.
Is that blue?
Oh, you mean Dabba Dee, Dabba Die. Yeah.
Dude, I love Eiffel 65. Don't you joke.
Well, there's 4 more records to come. So yeah, it's just. I mean, I still think I like the "She's the One" soundtrack better because it has the song "California" on it, which I'll throw in with this too, which is a very jangly, just like Laurel Canyon kind of song. I just think it's beautiful. But yeah, I mean, Tom Petty. I mean, all of his hits. The songwriting is definitely inspired me to do the 3-minute rock song that has a solid message to it. They were of that mindset of don't bore us, get to the chorus kind of thing. That was kind of their philosophy. So I've got to go with my man Tom to kick it off.
Now, so question on that, since that's sort of like a interpretation is not the right word, but similar to "She's the One" soundtrack.
Yeah.
Now, did they release "She's the One" soundtrack on vinyl? Is that out there on vinyl?
I don't think so because Wallflowers was 95 and "She's the One" was 97. So I would
Right. So I mean, if it was, that would have been very limited and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
It's hard to say. I mean, again, I don't know about copyright things because they do a Beck song, they do Lucinda Williams on there. So I don't know if that they have to go through different things to get through that. I would love to see "She's the One" because I would love to have "California" on vinyl. But yeah, I mean, this is still really solid. If you've never heard it, feels like a more complete album.
Yeah,
it's just I don't know. I really like it. But again, Tom Petty as a whole, as a songwriter, has just inspired me to no end.
Yeah,
so,
I have that.
Hey,
right. Love it. Well, you're definitely more. For the people that know you, or for the people that don't know you, it doesn't. They'll know now. Like you're the creator, the inventor of the Americana tag, right? This is sort of your thing, right? The singer-songwriter, the bloke up there with an acoustic guitar kind of bucking around. This is, the sort of thing. I don't want to say it's not my thing. I love that. I'm just not nearly as, I think, experienced, educated, as big of a fan as you are. So I'll plus I got to pull 5 records for every time I do one of these damn shows. So mine are going to be pretty cookie cutter. I'll put it that way. But I did put in my head, I was like, who are my 5 favorite singer-songwriters? Like when I think of somebody walking up to a microphone with an acoustic guitar or somebody sitting down at a piano and it's just them, like who do I want to hear? Who's impacted me? All that kind of stuff. So, yeah, pretty cookie cutter, but hopefully you'll go into some deep cuts later and all that kind of stuff. So this first artist I'll show has kind of a ridiculously absurd catalog and discography. He's someone who's been in a number of bands. He's gone through a number of styles, still making music today, even though he's approaching the age of probably 80 or so. But to me, what was funny, I'll share this story. When I was growing up in high school and kind of just getting into, rock and roll music like so many of us were, this guy kind of was like, he was kind of like a joke. Me and my buddy, actually, Sean, who was on the previous show, we would always kind of make fun of this guy. Like, we'd be like, what a bad voice. Like, his voice was like super easy to make fun of. And, we would hear songs that he'd be playing. We're like, did this man just play an entire guitar solo using one note? Like, is he even a good guitar player? I don't know. It's so sloppy and just dirgy and nasty. And he can't sing. What's the deal with this guy? And then at some point, I got a record that I'm about to show that was just a solo show of him from 1971 or so, just playing acoustic guitar and just playing piano. And it completely changed my entire outlook on this artist. And I've grown to love everything he's done. And if you haven't guessed yet, it's Neil Young. And for me, it's Live at Massey Hall was what changed the game for me. It's like you grow up hearing things like Cinnamon Girl, which is the song that's the entire guitar solo is one note. Or, just other stuff that you're like, what? I don't know what's going on here. But for me, this was the first time I heard everything of just Neil on an acoustic guitar or Neil at a piano. And I listened to this record so much in high school and shortly thereafter that it is like permanently just embedded in my mind. I remember, I don't know who, I'm sure obviously came from him, but this was out of print for a really long time. It was really expensive. And then I got a reissue a couple years ago and I added that thing to the cart faster than you could say yo mama. but I did. And yeah, I mean, for me, I've always said before, again, I've learned to appreciate most of Neil's stuff. I don't think I can still do like the Geffen years, the Trans and Landing on Water and all that kind of stuff. But I have the utmost respect and appreciation for him as an artist. And especially, I've always said my favorite Neil is give me Neil with an acoustic guitar and a microphone, or give me Neil at a piano with a microphone. And this, I don't know if you've heard this, Sam, but for me, I know a little bit about your relationship with Neil. Not the biggest Neil fan, but I think if you were to be a fan, it would be this type of stuff that you would be into. This is right after Journey Through the Journey Through the Past is in there, but also right after the Gold Rush and right before Harvest.
Okay.
So it's interesting hearing him say like this is a brand new song that's coming out called about an old man on a ranch and all this kind of. I mean, he really did represent this sort of very old soul at the age of like 23 or whatever it was, right? What's the line? 24, and there's so much more. Like, those types of things that we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later as we go along. But some of these cats were talking to, they were singing and songwriting as if they were in their 70s and saw the war.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they're in their early 20s, and it's like, what? So, yeah, this is always my go-to. If anybody asks me for any Neil Young and what I would want to play all the time, it's Live at Massey Hall. Just absolutely incredible. I love this. So, yeah, that's my first pick.
Yeah, I need to get into it because I want to like Neil, which is scary because I'm such a Dylan fan that I don't know if I could afford to like Neil just because of how much there is to get into.
Yeah.
All right, so again, I'm gonna go. This is my second and probably final, like stereotypical Sam thing, but this one definitely like this record in particular really influenced my guitar playing, and I'll just show it. It's this album right here, which is The Tree of Forgiveness by John Prine. Ended up being his last record in 2018. He would die from COVID a little less than 2 years later. And I got to see this tour, as I've talked about a million times, one of his last 6 or 7 shows with my mom, which was a joy because she saw Prine in the 80s and a few times in the 80s, I think once in the 90s. So she was a college fan of John Prine, when during like the age of Madonna and all that stuff, she was listening to Tom Waits and John Prine, which is really cool. But this record, it's so simple because again, a lot of these songs were scraps that he had saved up in a trunk, and essentially his wife and his kids were like, "Dad, like you got some good stuff here. Like you haven't put out a full album of original music in 15 years, or whatever it was." And so he essentially rented a room in Nashville for like 3 nights. He took a couple of guitars and a ukulele, I think, by himself, no distractions, and he took all those scraps and we're putting songs together. He worked with Jason Isbell, Dan Auerbach, Randy Carlisle, are all over this record. But the songs on here are just so they just hit me exactly how I want them to hit me. I mean, there are songs about longing. There are songs about thinking back over life, just because Prime was only 71 or no, what was it? He was, I think it's 71 with this picture, and he looks 100 years old. So Prime lived very, very hard early on, and then cancer kind of kicked him in the butt, and he had to kind of stop that hard living for the last 20 years of his life. But just, songs on here like Summer's End, The Lonesome Friends of Science, which is like a fun little song about kicking Pluto out of the planetary sphere, Boundless Love, which is beautiful, Caravan of Fools, which is like the closest thing he ever got to a political song. And then the last song, When I Get to Heaven, where it's just like, all these things he's going to do that if he did them on earth, it would get him in trouble, but he's going to be dead. So it doesn't matter if he's doing them in heaven. So it's got those classic Prine, tales on it. But again, this album encompasses just about everything from John Prine. I really could have shown any John Prine album. But this one in particular, because this was the album where I was like, yeah, I'm in love with John Prine's music. And this is still my favorite record by John Prine. A lot of people love that first one, which I do. It's a perfect record. It's essentially the greatest John Prine hits, if you consider his songs hits. But this album is just so full of charm, and it's like 31, 32 minutes. It's very short, but it's everything you need. And it's inspired me with a lot of how I do stylistically with my tunes that I write, and how I pick the guitar. I kind of use a hybrid of John Prine and some others. But yeah, I mean this is the record that I was like, wow, like I see what he's doing. What he's playing is very simple, but it can drive him a point. And this guy who had a 40-year career, like I was like, yeah, I've got to work in his kind of style, just because like if he could do it, what's wrong with writing simple songs? Like, you don't have to have Beatle chords and all that stuff. So this is number 2 for me. True Forgiveness.
And remember, what year did that come out?
18.
And he died, what, 2-3 years later?
2020. He was one of the first COVID, like celebrity COVID deaths, like April of 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my guess is that's I want to listen to that record because I know how much you loved it, and obviously I've been on a number of live chats with you where you've talked about that record. I'm projecting here, but my assumption is that even though that's not like his it's not like his Bowie Black Star, right? Like that's not like his death record.
He didn't know he was dying. No, yeah.
My assumption is that there's still a connection there, right? Like when you hear "When I Go to Heaven," it's like probably difficult to think about. Like, oh man, like he had no idea, right? Like,
but it's so Joe. Like that song is so like because there's like a kazoo solo in it, and like I saw him in November of 19, and he died, like in April. So like he did that song. Before the encore, and they came back and they did Paradise, but but hearing back on it now, you're like, well, it's a perfect swan song record. Yes, it does hit differently for sure.
Yeah, I'll have the last record I'll show is somebody who doesn't sound at all like John Prine, but I think from an approach to songwriting is very similar, and sort of the concepts and philosophies that went into it, right? Like I always said, like John Prine was like he was like the thinking man's Dylan, and Dylan's already like the thinking man's fan anyway. Yeah. But it was like that additional level of like, oh yeah, like of course everybody likes Dylan, but only some people like Prine, and we're not going to compare them. But it was that you've talked about. It's like that element of like there was tongue in cheek in so much of what he would like, you know what I mean? Like so much of what was going on, and again, I think similar to somebody I'll show here in a little bit. But I'll save that till the end because it's my favorite. Let's see. Well, you know what? We'll get this one out of the way because you mentioned it and it's fine. But as I said before, my choices are pretty cookie cutter. But it's tough not to have a conversation about singer-songwriters without talking about, our buddy up from Minnesota, Robert Zimmerman himself, right? And it's funny that you brought up Blood on the Tracks because that was the one that I grabbed. And I think, this is not like the dark horse pick by any means, right? Yeah. I think it's tough to compare something like this to a Blonde on Blonde or whatever.
Right.
But, you obviously talk about the divorce or the breakup that he was going through with, during his relationship at the time and all the different things going on. And, I think for a lot of people, it's like, this is one of those sort of records that it's interesting that for Bob Dylan fans, a lot of them will say that this is their favorite. And for a lot of people who aren't big Bob Dylan fans, a lot of them will say that this is their favorite. And there's not a whole lot of artists like that, right? And so, it's one of those things of like, oh, if you couldn't do like the 60s folky stuff, like this is different. I mean, it's not, but it is, it's like that whole thing. I was telling you before, I mean, obviously it's a perfect record and everything's amazing. You could argue Tangled Up in Blue is one of the best ways to start an album, period. Yeah. I mean, just outstanding. I've shared with you my favorite track on here is Idiot Wind. It's not the popular pick, but I've always just loved how that whole thing has, how that whole song travels. I mean, honestly, that's kind of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek song for Bob in a way, in the way those things kind of come together. But Shelter from the Storm and Buckets of Rain to close it out. Is this my favorite? Maybe. I think it's really hard to compare this to like a Blonde on Blonde, right? but I would say those two, without a doubt, are totally my favorites. And for the longest time, I wasn't a Bob Dylan fan. I think I remember telling you and a number of people on some of our live chats, like the singer-songwriter was such a later thing for me because I was always obsessed with bands. I wanted a band. I wanted that 4-piece or 5-piece up there, ripping guitar solos and Hammond organ solos and all that kind of stuff that I didn't appreciate or listen to or respect people like Bob or so many others that we'll talk about until much later in life. And the important thing is that I got there, but certainly late, better late than never. So yeah, that's what I grabbed. This is, of course, this is my pretentious Mobile Fidelity pick. But here's the thing. This is Mobile Fidelity on the single LPs. Now these are $40, brand new. You know what though? A first press original of this, because isn't there? I don't know if you know this, but the first presses of Blood on the Tracks, it has a completely black cover, I think. And then the later pressings are different based on the lyrics. There's some whole story with it. But it's one of those things of it's tough to find a clean copy of this as is for less than probably $20 or $25 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually enjoy the MoFis that are the single LPs. They're $40. It's when they get into these doubles that are $60 and I'm I don't think so. But this sounds great. So shout out to MoFi or whatever. But yeah, good stuff. Special, here, you'll love this. A special limited edition. Of course, this is number 19,842. Very limited. Very limited.
Yeah. That's how many views we'll get.
That's what I'm talking about. I appreciate the confidence.
Absolutely. All right.
What's next?
Again, another record that's kind of encapsulate just an artist. I could have picked any record by him. I'm going to go with his most generic, even though this guy doesn't really have generic artists. Generic records. I'm going to go with this guy, Justin Townes Earle, who, if those that don't know, it's Steve Earle's son, Steve Earle, who sang, Galway Girl, Copperhead Road. Was kind of an alt country guy, kind of a disciple of the Townes Van Zant, the Guy Clarks. He was coming up around the same time as Rodney Crowell, Emmylou Harris. They were all kind of around the same time. This is his son, Justin, who unfortunately passed away in 2022, one or two, because of some drug-related issues. But this album has his biggest song, which is called Harlem River Blues. It's the title track of the album. But he is just one of these guys where he did not shy away from his addiction. He was right there in the vein of a Townes Van Zandt. His middle name, Townes was his godfather, for those that don't know. Okay. So he grew up, having Townes in his living room, playing guitar and smoking with his dad. So
the influence is there, obviously. Yeah,
it's definitely there. And just his finger picking on guitar is just unbelievable. If anybody knows, it's called Travis picking. It's based after Merle Travis, the old country singer. He was on the old Will the Circle Be Unbroken album by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. He did 9 Pound Hammer was a big song that he did. But with Travis picking, your thumb is used almost as a percussive, on the two high low strings, the E and the A. And Justin he made his picking style it was just it's just like a freight train with his thumb. It's just unbelievable how different the tempo was with his thumb versus what he was picking on the guitar. And if you listen to a song like I Don't Care, which is from his debut EP, it's so fast. It's just unbelievable what he can do with just a little Recording King acoustic parlor guitar, which was kind of his guitar of choice. So when I was learning about Justin Townes Earle in college, I remember I turned a buddy of mine onto him too. And we were both he came over to my apartment one time and we were both learning together a song that Justin Townes Earle did called They Killed John Henry. And so to listen to Justin Townes Earle, to me, takes me back to college. It takes me to learning how to finger pick, because by that point I had stopped taking lessons. It was my junior year of college, specifically when that event happened. But again, like I said, he didn't shy away from his addiction. His lyrics talked about his addiction, about Living Hard. I mean, one of these songs is called Slipping and Sliding. Where it's just singing about, slipping and sliding, feeling low. It's just, it's heartbreaking, but he did it so well. I don't know, like he's just one of these guys that you believe every single thing that he said because he lived it. He's not putting up anything. He was even better just him with a guitar, at these, dingy little clubs. I know I've had a couple of my uncles went to go see Justin Townsend, 2010 or so. And he was one of those guys that kind of slipped out of my fingers that I didn't get to see because I was really getting into him. His last record was called The Saint of Lost Causes, which I think came out like in 2019, which is really good. I mean, he's one of those guys too, a lot like his dad, where none of his records like veered too far away from what he was all about, but it didn't get boring. Like some people like complain, like, oh, AC/DC, like all their stuff, you can switch songs and it's the same song on this record as this record, or whatever. But with Justin, like, he wasn't doing like, he didn't have like a psychedelic country record, and he didn't do, like a bluegrass album. He just stuck to songwriting, stuck to how he played guitar. He had some great players with him. He was good friends with Jason Isbell to a point. A lot of the Old Crow Medicine Show guys played on a lot of his records. He's just a fantastic songwriter. Again, one of those casualties of the road, which is very unfortunate. Yeah. But he inspired a lot of my picking style as well. And I would love to. He also inspired me because his voice was almost like just a 2 or 3 note range, which is about where I sing, because I don't have a range to my voice. And I was like, I can look to Justin as somebody like, okay, if he can do this, then I can try to get away with it too. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
For my third pick, I've talked about this guy with you ad nauseum, but from here on out, there's a connection between the 3 last artists I'm going to show. And I think that connection really starts with this guy, and then sort of goes from there. It's tough to think about what my favorite record is of his. I mean, I really love the first, 5 a lot, and then he sort of became sort of a victim of the 80s. But to me, I think when you just talk about just early to mid 70s singer-songwriter, to me it doesn't get much better. Again, for me, than Jackson Browne. Got a chance to see him a couple years ago, and he was just awesome. I've always loved Jackson Browne. I don't know. I can't really put my finger on exactly why I love him so much. I think it's like this. I don't know. It's like this. There's like this humility about him, just in the way that he writes. He doesn't have a great voice. It's like he has a voice that's going to bring the angels home. But his writing is just so, there's just this modesty and humility about him. And he would always be writing about, I think, very important topics, still is to this day. But important not just from like a political stance, right? Like, his storytelling was outstanding. And I think compared to like his rivals or his counterparts at the time, to me, I've just always connected so much more with him. For this, I pulled Late for the Sky, 74, I guess celebrating, 50 years this year. But obviously the title track on here is great. Fountain of Sorrow is great. For a Dancer is one of my all-time favorite Jackson Browne songs, which might be like, when you talk about my favorite Jackson Browne songs, it might be in the running with what this closes with, which is Before the Deluge. And I mean, just love those songs so much. Again, that sort of just perfect storytelling, songwriting from him. I think The Pretender were to come next, and that's got I think tragedy would follow him directly after. His wife at the time would die by suicide in a really tragic sort of way, and then he goes on to make The Pretender, and then all the stuff after that. And so I've always just loved Jackson Browne. And my favorite, Sam, you might appreciate this, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I think one of my favorite Jackson Browne songs, I don't know when he released it, I don't know that it shows up on an album, but it's I joke that it's like my favorite holiday song, and it's called The Rebel Jesus.
Yeah,
and
he did it with Chieftains. I was on the Chieftains, their Chieftains Christmas album. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Then you know it. Yeah. That is something that's still, when the holidays come around, I still think about, again, just the lyric of that is so brilliant. And, they get the same as the Rebel Jesus. If you ever ask why there are poor, you'll get the same as the Rebel Jesus. And so that, again, and I think, his recent album from a couple years ago, Downhill from Everywhere, I thought was a strong late career record.
My Cleveland Heart,
Yeah.
great song.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, again, and other shout out, David Lindley. I think we just lost a couple years ago too, a recent loss, and
Last year.
he's one of those guys that was so instrumental, literally, to the sound and what became of Jackson Browne from a recording and songwriting standpoint. So he's always been one of my go-to favorites. And again, there's a connection amongst my next two choices to Jackson. So we'll start there. And I guess we'll throw it over to you for your number 4.
4. Yep. Great pick. And I've told this before. Jackson Browne was my first concert after COVID restrictions kind of let up. And it was just an emotional experience to hear him sing, in that way. It was just incredible. It was my first and only time so far seeing him. So it was a great time. All right. Another one. Again, for those that like avidly follow my channel and, collect all of my bootleg recordings of my videos, know that, I talk about this artist a lot. I did kind of a standalone video kind of talking about this artist and why I have come to respect him, especially recently. And that is Mr. Nick Drake. This is his first album. He only put out 3 in his lifetime. This is 5 Leaves Left. And we've kind of talked about before, I think in other videos, maybe on even the live stream that we've done, like seasonal records. Like Nick Drake for me is all about the fall. It's rainy days, gray skies. The leaves are just hanging onto the trees. Like that's what Nick Drake to me is all about. So like come, like a week or two after Labor Day in September, I'm like Nick Drake on repeat. I've got his 3 records. I have some of the comps that came out with demos and all that stuff. Like if Nick Drake touched it, I want it. He's one of those artists because there's so little of it. And so if you hear something new, you're like, oh, it's something different from Nick Drake, even if it's like a really trashy like hotel recording of a song that you can barely understand the vocals. But he was also a victim of not of the road, because Nick didn't like to tour. He was very shy, very anxious, depressed person. A lot of people say he might have been, because again, very little is known about Nick Drake. People say he might have been homosexual, which at that time, obviously in the 70s, was not as accepted as it is today. So there was a lot of, in his lyrics, like you can come to some conclusions. It's never been proven, but there's a lot to Nick Drake that's mystery that nobody knows about, and which I think makes him that much cooler.
Was he 27 Club?
No, he was younger. I think he was
like 24 or something.
25, 25 or 6. Yeah.
Crazy.
But he was on Island Records as well. We were talking about Island Records earlier with Tom Waits. But like songs on here, like it's very very simple in the instrumentation. However, his tunings are just unbelievable. Like Nick Drake, like I don't know any Nick Drake songs on guitar. I don't know if I ever plan on learning Nick Drake songs on guitar, because they're these weird tunings. He always used guitar strings that almost were like dead, like they were old strings. You do have Richard Thompson is all over this record from Fairport Convention. They were friends. So he's one of those few connections that are still around that could tell us anything about Nick. But songs on here like Day Is Done is just a beautiful song. He's got a song on here called Cello Song. It's chamber-y, but it's also, it's very much like this kid up in his room, like with like angst. This was like an early angst record, really. Riverman is fantastic. I know there's that was one of his, songs that you usually hear in any kind of Nick Drake tribute is Riverman. I know Chrissy Hind did a record a few years ago, and she covers Riverman beautifully on that record. Fruit Tree is great. Way to Blue. Again, mostly it's just Nick on guitar, but there are some, co-lead guitar players. There are obviously some strings. Just a wonderful record. The second record, Brighter Later, was kind of like it was more orchestrated. It was very Astral Weeks-y. Had some background vocals on it, some female backing vocals. And then Pink Moon, his last record, was just him with the guitar. And he was working on other music when he died. But again, he never wanted to tour. But he was one of those guys, he picked up so much fame after his death. I mean, you have guys like, I think some of the guys from REM look to him as an inspiration. I've heard people compare his voice actually to John Mayer, which is interesting because he's got that smoky kind of voice, like that, like kind of like a voice. But again, I don't look to Nick necessarily as like a guitar influence. I don't look to him as a lyrical influence on me. But in terms of just like setting a tone to a song, I definitely look at Nick because like that autumnal feel that Nick gives off, I'm like, I would love to write some songs like that. Or to just write like that with anything. So this is number 4, Nick Drake. I just went with the first one because I love Day Is Done. I love Riverman, but I could have picked any of the 3.
That was going to be my question. I mean, those 3 are just, they're all perfect in their own way, right? But I was going to ask if that was like your favorite or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, because a couple of years ago, I did my 100 favorite records, and I had this one a little bit higher than Pink Moon, but it depends. I mean, it depends on the season. I mean, this fall. I mean, I think this past year I've listened to. I think I listened to Brighter Later more than the others. So it's just. I mean, there's only the 3, so you can really dive into them equally. And like because they're so short. Usually, if I'm listening to one, like I'm going boom, boom, boom within.
That I don't know the Pink Moon cover art is something else though. I mean, what a classic. But you mentioned too another one of those like. He's like the singer-songwriter version of Big Star, right? Like
kind of, yeah.
Nobody, he had I think probably critical success, maybe, but nobody, not commercial success.
Nobody bought his records.
Nobody bought his records, and gosh, go find yourself one of those original Pink Island UK Nick Drake records, and you're a rich man, right?
They're grails for me for sure. Yeah. Actually, even the ones that I have, I mean, these were the 2011 imports. I have all 3 of them. I had a buddy who like texted me. He's like, "Hey, there's this shop that's selling these. Like, they got like 10 of each in stock. Like, get them now." So I'm fortunate just to have these because these are hard to find in their own right.
I don't have any of them, and always ones that I've wanted, but I don't have any of them.
Well, so. I have it.
Okay, sir.
You have to keep it fun.
Yeah. That's a great pick. That's awesome. Onward and Upward. So this one's a little bit of a cheat-ish because it's not a solo artist. It is a band, but the band is led by somebody who is their main songwriter. So I'm just going to go ahead and to approach it that way. And again, I'll get to the Jackson Browne connection here in a second. The other difference is this is a modern band. Sam, I've talked about this band a lot. They're probably up there in terms of modern bands, some of my favorites that there are. And I'm talking about the band Dawes and the singer Taylor Goldsmith. And, the record that I chose is the first one I heard, which is Nothing Is Wrong. This was like a special anniversary release from a couple of years ago. That's cut at 45 RPM. It comes with like a bonus 7-inch. Alternate artwork, that sort of stuff. So, these guys are out of LA and, they sort of channel that, I don't know, Laurel Canyon, but it's not like they sound like CSN or anything, or, they don't sound like David Crosby per se. But they definitely channel that sort of LA folk rock band, Americana bits here and there. They are a full band. But to me, Taylor has always, there's been a number of songs he's written that I have just been blown away by his expression as a singer. The lyrics have always blown me away. To me, he's always just been a perfect marriage. And he wears his influences on his sleeves of like 2 of my favorite songwriters, which might be bearing the lead here, of Jackson Browne and Warren Zevon. And like those 2, and of course that sort of LA connection. For me, the reason I'm showing this, my favorite Dawes records are either this, Nothing Is Wrong, or All Your Favorite Bands is the other one. But to me, the song that I heard that blew me away, and I said, like, this is one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life, is A Little Bit of Everything. To me, that was always the best song that Jackson Browne or Warren Zevon never wrote. I mean, like, the influences are so there. Very similar, I think, in sort of the almost tongue-in-cheek that you were talking about with Prine, and I may or may not be talking about with my final pick, of that sort of being able to take a song and in one bit of the song, you're talking about this really heavy topic that makes you go, ooh, whoa, like that's heavy, that's deep, like that hit me. But in the next verse, you're giggling and you're like, that's a funny verse, that's a good verse. And in the same song, and that sort of emotional, trip is just really cool. So the Jackson Browne connection here is on the song, I think, Far Away. Jackson Browne either is doing backing vocals or he might do like a bridge verse or something in here too. Again,
cool.
They're fans of him. But I've always just been a huge Dawes fan, and Dawes is the band, but Taylor Goldsmith is the singer, leader, songwriter. Married to one Mandy Moore, which is very random but cool. It's as it were, but and this is one of these bands that I'll like go away from, not intentionally. You can't listen to everything all the time, and then I'll throw on one of their records out of just being I'll listen to Dawes, and then it's 3 or 4 records after that. Like I get sucked into it. So Dawes and Taylor Goldsmith is my 4th pick for this one. So
very nice. I didn't know Jackson collaborated with him.
Yeah,
that's cool.
All right, number 1, 5, or whatever.
Yeah, no, these are definitely no order. But this is an artist who I picked. The reason I picked him is because it's a direct YouTube affiliation, and that if it weren't for YouTube connections that I've made, I wouldn't have gotten into this guy's music. And I think I might have pulled one of his records when we kind of did a similar thing when you were over here back in the fall when we did our live stream or our video, and I pulled 5 records and kind of associated them with friendships and that sort of thing. And this might have been one of the ones that I pulled. I can't remember, but I'm going to go with Michael Nesmith and the First National Band. This is the first record called Magnetic South. His first record after quitting the Monkees. There's Mike in the middle there with the guys. Again, he's one of these guys who, because he was from, the Monkees, who critics kind of panned as, being kids' music, and, they were actors put together for, TV or whatever, just like, any of these boy bands of today that, were manufactured to put together. The Monkees were manufactured. They'd already picked, 2 of them already, Mickey and Davey, and they needed the other 2 who were semi-musicians. Mike had played music. He already played the Troubadour in Los Angeles a couple of years before. He obviously, he wrote different drum for Linda Ronstadt. He had songs covered by, Emmylou Harris covered some songs. So, I mean, he had, and Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. So he was established, but he was associated with the Monkees. And so, again, his legacy kind of, just did like that. Even though the music he was putting out was, solid music, it was that beginning of like that cosmic country rock scene that Graham Parsons and the Eagles and, Poco and Jackson Browne, like people like that were starting to get behind. The Byrds had hit that point in the late 60s. This record was 1970. So, I mean, it was right there with all those people, and it was equally as good. He had OJ Red Rhodes on pedal steel, who had played with, a ton of people. And so, like, I mean, these were true musicians that were playing with Mike, and Mike was just a very talented songwriter, because on this record you have one of his, actually, I think it cracked the top 40, Joanne, which I know one of our groups that we share a mutual admiration for, the Lemon Twigs. covered Joanne after Nesmith died. Just the two brothers came on stage. There's a YouTube video you should check it out. I'll try to remember to send it to you.
That.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome,
really
yeah.
good. They play it pretty much straight ahead. And I know that nobody in that audience knew Joanne.
Not a
They
clue.
might have heard of the Monkees, but they did not know the song Joanne by Michael Nesmith.
No clue. Yeah.
So and then like songs on here like Nine Times Blue, which I play live a lot. The Crippled Lion, which really shows the pedal steel prowess of Red Rhodes. It's just a really he's just such a solid songwriter, and he was like he had like psychedelic lyrics with under the guise of pedal steel guitars. So like those first, like they call them the Red, White, and Blue trilogy. You had this, Loose Salute, and Nevada Fighter, which all came out within like 14 months of each other. They're again like Nick Drake. If I listen to this album, I'm going to listen to the next one and the next one because they're all 30-minute records. So you can knock them all out in 90 minutes, and boom, you've knocked out 3 Michael Nesmith records. And like, wow, okay, I can kind of see what's why he matters and why he should matter more than he does. But my buddy from YouTube, Tommy from Tommy's Musical Adventures, he's the one that got me into Nez because I was watching his videos before I even knew him. He was talking about Nez and meeting Nez and seeing some solo shows by him, and I ended up getting to see Mickey Dolenz and Michael Nesmith in 2021 on their farewell kind of duo tour as the Monkees. But I love Nez's songwriting. I love his singing. I think he's a criminally underrated singer. And again, he was just one of those cool guys because he had the country accent, but he was hanging out with the Laurel Canyon people, the Mamas and the Papas and the Beatles, and I know the Beatles aren't. Don't push me down, people. I know the Beatles.
The Beatles aren't from L.A., Sam.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
So I mean, I got to go with Nez. I've got a bunch of his stuff. He's one of those other guys I'm trying to become a completist with. The 7A record company is reissuing a bunch of his records. They've reissued 3 or 4 already, and some live, rare live stuff. But I love Nez, and like I get in the mood where I'm like I've got to Nez it out, So
how many solo albums did he release?
Before he even left, because he was on was it RCA before, and then he started Pacific Arts. I think he did 5 or 6 just on RCA, and then he went to Pacific Arts. He probably had 10 or so. Yeah.
Up until his death, or did he stop recording after a while?
He did one called I think his last he did a couple of records that were he did them in conjunction with like a novel that you were supposed to read while listening to the records. Like the first one was The Prison, which the record came with like this little 60-page booklet that you're supposed to read, follow the narrative while listening to the soundtrack essentially. And he did one called The Ocean like in 2005 or 6, and then he just because he was independently wealthy because his mom invented liquid paper. So when she died, so he had millions and millions of dollars when she died.
Must be nice.
Yeah, so he said that he was a lazy writer and it also gave him the creative ability to start his own record label, to fail and to like not have these commercial successes, but like every record he put out, was like commercially considered worse than the first, but he still did it because he was an artist.
Right.
Just so cool. And like when you know that, and if you read his book Infinite Tuesday, you're like, wow, this dude failed so much, but he kept going. So
yeah, it's awesome. And we maybe a different conversation for a different day, but we sort of talked about like how the Monkees are sort of viewed from the I don't want to say the uneducated because that's kind of condescending, but like from a lot of people when they hear about the Monkees, they say exactly what you said, right? They're this manufactured, like they're a fake band, right? Like that was always how it was sort of framed to me, as like they're fake. They don't play their instruments. Maybe they started sort of playing them later. But it's interesting that I think most people don't look at them as songwriters, but it's probably time that we change that and look a little bit deeper, right?
Oh yeah.
Cool. Well, my last one, I kind of buried the lead a little bit, but that's fine. Back to the earlier point that I guess I made of like, I would by no means say that this is the best songwriter of all time or the best singer of all time or the best whatever. but for whatever reason, just the person who has made the biggest impact on me or has emotionally impacted me the most, whatever that is someone who I think is well respected, but I think well respected amongst musicians, right? Like he's like the musician's musician of, but didn't really quite gather the support of everybody, with the exception of a gigantic hit he had, and then everybody sort of revolved around that. But just a fascinating life, a fascinating story, a pretty heartbreaking end to his life that I'll talk about. But my favorite, if someone were asking me who's my favorite singer-songwriter of all time, it's a no-brainer. It's Warren Zevon for me. It just, again, just a fascinating sort of story. First of all, as I'm showing it up here on camera, well, what a cool looking dude. I mean, first of all, I mean, that's just a great cover of just what a badass. So this is his self-titled quote unquote debut on Asylum from 76, I think. He did release a solo album in 69. That was his actual first solo album, but it was not, I think it was only released in like Italy or Germany or something. And it was like a weird acoustic bluesy sort of thing that, it's like, it's viewed in the same way of David Bowie's first record. Like it's kind of disowned. That's not really David. It's not really Warren. And then from there, he went on to be the musical arranger for the Everly Brothers. And so throughout the early and mid 70s, he's a classically trained pianist, which also kind of gives him this, that he was a classically trained arranger and he understands string arrangements and how, orchestras work and theory and all that kind of stuff. And so, he jumps back in on Asylum and then puts this record out. So a lot of people say this is his debut. It's not technically, but for all intents and purposes, it is. Now, the big record to show is Excitable Boy that came out 2 years later. That had Werewolves of London on it. That has some of my favorite songs of all time on it. I think the first song I ever heard outside of Werewolves of London, which was always just a great song, right? Like again, going back to that sort of like John Prine-ish, this was the comparison, right? Like they don't sound anything alike, but I think the way that they approach songwriting is very similar. And on the other record, Excitable Boy, it's like one of the first songs I heard was Rollin' the Headless Thompson Gunner. And it's a 4.5-minute song that's a story about, an American soldier who's basically murdered by the CIA in a war in Congo. And, it's just, this whole idea, he was the one that introduced me to the 4-minute storytelling, right? Like, who can tell a story in 4 minutes? The reason I show this record, I do go back and forth between this record and Excitable Boy is my favorite, but I wanted to show this because my favorite song of all time, Sam, I don't know if you have a favorite song of all time.
God Only Knows by the Beach Boys.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that might be actually the best song of all time. And that's what Paul says, right? And
yeah.
You gonna argue with Paul?
Yeah.
I'm not. But my favorite song of all time is what closes this album, called Desperados Under the Eaves. As I was actually pulling this, I was thinking of you earlier, Sam, just because the way the song kind of sets up is you have this big orchestration up front that he arranges. He kind of goes through this whole storytelling about the sort of the life he's living in LA and sort of all that comes with it. But then the end piece, which is, kind of funny because the line, and only Warren can do, is, talking about the Hollywood Motel and listening to the air conditioner hum. Mm. And it goes into this big orchestrated vocal harmony arrangement that's arranged by who? The great Carl Wilson, which again, another one of those bands that like you don't associate the Beach Boys, maybe Brian Wilson because he's brilliant, right? But you don't associate the Beach Boys with like, okay, yeah, they're good singers, but arrangers, like vocal arrangements and orchestra, I don't know. And so it sort of ends with like this 2.5-3 minute big vocal harmony bit arranged by Carl and it's my favorite song of all time. I've often joked, but it's not really a joke, but it's kind of a joke, so people don't think I'm crazy. Like, I want that song played at my funeral. It hits in the emotional ways. To me, it's just my favorite song of all time. I could listen to it a million times, and it still means as much as it does today. But of course, the big connection is that this album was produced by Jackson Browne, and he's all over it too. So,
cool.
you know, it's just huge. What's also kind of funny about this record is that it's sort of, I don't want to say created the career, but Linda Ronstadt made a living on half of these songs. So, Hasten Down the Wind was a big hit for her. The huge hit for her was Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me. That's a Warren song. So many great songs on here. Mohammed's Radio, Carmelita, Frank and Jesse James. You know, could go on and on about how much I love Warren Zevon. Lost him way too early. For those watching, for the millions of people out there watching, one of my favorite, I'll go back maybe once or twice a year around the anniversary of Warren's death back in the mid-2000s. Of him and David Letterman were really close friends. Yep. In fact, he would sit in for, what's his face? I can't think of his name. Paul Schaefer. When Paul Schaefer was out on vacation, Warren would sit in and would conduct the band or whatever. And you know, Warren often said that Dave was the biggest friend Warren's music ever had. And there's an episode of the David Letterman show where they dedicate the whole episode to Warren because basically he has 3 months to live. You know, They kind of let him know like he's got lung cancer and he's got just a few months to go. And still, I mean, just very like emotional but also like he's still, you know, I remember like they asked him this question of like, what would you do now? Like, what advice do you have? All this kind of stuff. And his line was just enjoy every sandwich. Just like that was enjoy every sandwich. And even that time of him knowing that he was going to die the next couple months, that was sort of the humor that he brought to it. So yeah, my favorite ever, Warren Zevon. Love this album, but also love Excitable Boy. They're both just terrific in all the ways. And yeah, that is my pick and monologue to wrap us all up. Sam, anything from you, man?
This was great because we got to learn, you know, a little bit about what makes us tick on a songwriter level. I mean, all those artists that you've mentioned, I've heard you talk about before, but it's nice to hear it in depth because a lot of times it's in passing. I mean, a lot of times when we're together, it's on live streams and blah, blah, blah. So it's nice to kind of break down some albums and, you know, just casually talk about it because, you know, this is what this YouTube community is all about, is just talking about stuff that nobody else wants to hear about in our real lives.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, we'll wrap it up here. Just, you know, I said it in the intro, but when I was sort of putting this idea together, like you were kind of top of the proverbial food chain of guests that I wanted on here, and just love hearing you talk about music. And it's been an honor. No, it's just been really great having you on and talking about these things. And we could probably go another hour or so, but yeah, just really appreciate you taking the time and hanging out and talking music and all that good stuff.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
All right. Cool, man. We'll talk to you later. All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.